So, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Lyle Blackburn. I'm an author, musician, and cryptid researcher. I'm the author of the books The Beast of Boggy Creek and Lizard Man.
Okay, and how did you get interested in cryptozoology?
Well, I mean, it's something I was always interested in when I was a kid. You know, I started out reading books about Bigfoot, and I saw a lot of the television documentaries, episodes of In Search Of, and of course the Patterson-Gimlin film, and that stuff always just fascinated me, and like at the same time it scared me. You know, I mean, I was a fan of horror movies and things like that, movie monsters, but of course to me, when I started thinking about Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, those things seemed so real. You know, real. The possibility that they actually existed just really grabbed me at that point. Later on, I saw a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek, and that really kind of solidified my love for cryptids, because rather than something like Bigfoot that was said to live in the Pacific Northwest, or of course Loch Ness way over in Scotland, The Legend of Boggy Creek documented some encounters of a Bigfoot-like creature in southern Arkansas, which was close to me because I lived in Texas. And so, you know, once I started thinking, wow, something like that could live around here.
You had to go find it?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that really fascinated me.
All right. What do you think of the whole field of cryptozoology at the moment?
You know, the field of cryptozoology in some ways has come a long way. In some ways, it's still where it was back in those days of the 70s. I mean, because we're still in the same pursuit to document or prove some of the same cryptids or animals that we were back then. You know, lake monsters, Bigfoot, and of course, you know, since then we've got Chupacabra. There's other ones that have come along that people are seeking to prove. But at this point, the popularity of it, which has been driven by a lot of the new TV shows that have been on, and just the general interest in subjects like cryptozoology and monsters and the paranormal and ghosts, you have a lot more people interested in that, so that therefore puts a lot more amateur researchers in the field. So at this point, I think we've got a lot of people on the case, but we haven't come too far as mainstream science accepting this kind of thing. Although there have been some scientists, Dr. Brian Sykes, he's done a lot of research and scientific study on the Yeti recently, which are good, solid scientific studies. I mean, this guy's a scientist, and you know, he's got an open mind about the evidence. At least he's willing to look at it and run it through some of these expensive tests, you know, to try and determine if the hair or whatever submitted evidence is that of an unknown species, or if we can rule it out because it was bear or human. And so we're making some progress as far as technology and science is becoming more accessible to people who want to try to prove cryptids.
What do you think of like Melba Ketchum's work with the DNA?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, I haven't read through that entire paper. But like so many of these people who have come forth and made claims and said that they're going to reveal some groundbreaking evidence or something, it never goes quite like we would hope. And in this case, obviously it wasn't released in the general scientific fashion that most other research is. Like, you know, if this was a study about some other an animal, species of ape or anything else, it would generally be written up and published through a reputable scientific journal. In this case, they kind of created a journal.
Bought one.
They bought one, and there was some...
Although to be fair, no one wanted to touch it. And that doesn't mean that the
Sure.
data was faulty, it's just because it was Bigfoot.
It's true, but I think if ultimately the goal here is, there's no reason to, unless you got some ironclad proof, and this is what I understand, you had a lot of people who were filming things, and there was allegedly a lot of these creatures at their disposal and access where they'd seen over and over. I mean, just get a killer picture and get a good video. They showed some clips of something that just didn't add up for me. If you're filming, they have a sleeping creature. Okay, great, but they filmed part of the body and part of it, and release only some of it. While it could have been a Bigfoot, this is not helping. This is only making people more dubious of it.
And these are the type of people too who said that they interact with them regularly. They're that is this what she took pictures of, like these people?
As the way I understand it, yeah, it was like they were running amok, and she had access to these, and there was some other people contributed to the evidence that was being examined. I mean, to me, in a lot of this, I just go by gut instinct and logic. If I had one of those and I came up on it and it was sleeping and I had a video camera, I would film it at all angles, and I would be thorough about it, and I would, if I was going to let it run off or do whatever it was going to do, I would wait until such time as it got up and moved, and I would film that too.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it was scaring us. There's no excuse. If I have that one opportunity to film it, you're not going to see me release like some part of a video and then say, well, I've got more later. I either have it or I don't. I mean, because there's so much of that stuff.
Well, I believe Melba said that she had met people who actually had them in her backyard. The woman was able to communicate with them, and they came in all the time, and Melba was like, oh yeah, I saw them here and I saw them there, but yet never provided any proof of this.
Exactly, and that's my stance. And while everybody knows that I'm extremely open-minded about Bigfoot, and I'm open to the possibility, and I'm all for the release of any evidence that can prove the creature, I'm also skeptical of it. That's the way it works. You have to be in balance between the two. And you're right, when you say you've got access to them and all that, but you're not producing anything better than a paper that other scientists that are more qualified to read that paper and make a judgment on it, read it and agree that it doesn't add up. They're the experts on that. I mean, I can read the paper, but I can make some conjecture. But I mean, ultimately, I'm more of a cryptid researcher, an investigative journalist who documents the history and collective evidence of it. I'm not a scientist who analyzes the evidence, because that's not my background.
But I do think a lot of scientists are closed off to the very possibility. The minute they hear something like that, they're just going to turn their backs on it. And her claim was that people had verified her research but didn't want their names attached to it. So that doesn't really, that's neither here nor there at that point.
Yeah, I think ultimately if you had some irrefutable evidence, just stick to your guns. There'll be some scientists that will eventually, Dr. Brian Sykes, Todd Disotell, those guys, I mean, they're open-minded about Bigfoot, and if I had something that nobody else would listen to, I'm sure those guys would eventually analyze it. And if it's something that was really, really good, then that's going to speak for you. I don't have to go and do a lot of song and dance, because if you've got the right evidence, eventually it's going to work for you.
Okay, all right. What do you think about some of the stranger Bigfoot tales, the ones that have a more paranormal bend to them?
In my opinion, I'm kind of, where I started with all this was a little more of a theory that we're talking about a biological creature, perhaps a species of ape or whatever it may be. It's a little more grounded in the animal world. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. While at the same time, the majority of the reports are just that, a hairy hominid. You know, people see it, it's not doing things out of the ordinary, it's walking through the woods, you see it for a moment and it's gone, like you would a deer or a bear. You have the reports, though, that suggest that the creature can, you know, shape shift, or it can disappear, and all that stuff. And, you know, who am I to say if this is what the witnesses claim to see and what they believe to see? Then, until we can prove different, then I can't really say if that's true or not. I don't really go by that theory, but I'm not one who's going to say, no, it's absolutely this, because I can't say that, and it would be wrong to discount other theories when I expect somebody to be open-minded about mine.
Well, you got to wonder too if there's something paranormal going on. Is it mimicking something real? Because you see that in other aspects of the paranormal. Men in Black accounts, for instance, you know, some of them seem to be actual government agents, but yet others, there's a paranormal element. Same with cattle mutilations, where some seem to be done by physical human beings in helicopters, but then there are the really high strangeness cases that are also just as verified. And you got to wonder if maybe the Bigfoot phenomena is doing something similar, like cases where you see a Bigfoot that came out of a UFO. You know, so maybe there's a real physical phenomena, but yet there's a paranormal aspect that's mimicking something that people either believe is real or is real.
Sure. I mean, there's you know, there's always another way you can look at it, where it's hard to say it's totally possible, or who knows. And it's just one of those things that people just have to keep researching, and you have to keep looking at from different angles, because it's really hard to prove all of it.
Yeah.
To me, but still an interesting subject, and one that is fun to speculate about and to just try to get your mind around it, because it's such a strange phenomenon.
So moving on to like the lizard man type of stuff, do you see the same reality there that you see in the Bigfoot sightings?
The lizard man kind of gets into another category that's even more mysterious and more unexplained, because whereas a Bigfoot, you know, it's less improbable that there could be some species of ape-like animals that have miraculously stayed undiscovered thus far. You know, that these apes had, you know, perhaps they were descendants of Gigantopithecus, they came across the Bering Strait, they were in the North American forests, and that's why they lived there. But where you talk about a lizard man, you know, you don't have a reference to the zoological kingdom to base that on. It starts to work more into the unknown. And so while I kind of looked at, in my book, The Lizard Man, I kind of looked at it sort of as a cryptozoology case, because in Bishopville, I mean, nobody was reporting seeing UFOs, and nobody saw one come out of a giant underground cave or anything. I kind of looked at it as a mystery animal, but at the end of the day, the possibility of some kind of hybrid between a human and a reptile is much more implausible. Even if even if you're going to go with the dinosaur theories, like it's an evolved dinosaur.
Right. Well, it also seems that some of the cases could have actually been Bigfoot sightings too, right?
Yeah, and that was what I drew from it. And you find in the course of my book that, you know, about the lizard man case, I would typically read about one of the sightings, Christopher Davis, in which he kind of described it as more like a lizard man, but really the media and the locals just called this thing the lizard man. That's just the name they gave it, and so your mind starts conjuring this up. But if you go back and look at the reports from the sheriff who had these people write down what they saw, they flat out say it had hair, it looked brown, and so now I'm starting to think, well, maybe, I mean, is it possible that the people who said they saw something more reptilian, maybe the Bigfoot was wet, maybe it came out of Scape or Swamp, had a skin condition, or it had algae on it. So it's, you know.
And once that idea though is planted that, oh, this is a lizard, people are gonna, you know, when they see something they don't know what it is, they're not gonna say, is that a Bigfoot? They're immediately gonna jump to lizard man rather than.
Sure. you see a big hulking shape that's humanoid in an area where somebody said they saw the lizard man. It could have been a Bigfoot in poor lighting.
Yeah.
But of course, what are you going to say? I saw the lizard man.
Yeah.
So that case is kind of cool for those aspects because there's a lot of different angles that you could go on it. And again, for me as a guy who's researching these and sharing it with the readers, it's fascinating when you get all the evidence together and start looking at it to try to figure out what the hell people were seeing.
Yeah. What are you working on now?
Currently, I'm working on what's a much larger project because where in the first two books I was fairly specific to one case and kind of looked at every detail of that. I'm working on more of a general Southern Bigfoot book that's the scope is much larger. And it's kind of a challenge because I've already set a precedence for my book where I'm very thorough and I have a lot of detailed evidence.
And now you got to do it over a wide area.
And I'm thinking, we'll just do it on the South. Like 16 states. I'm like, well, this is a lot. And I do have a ton of stories and a ton of witness research and people I've interviewed and some great stuff. So I'm just trying to somehow mold that into a narrative that's going to be interesting.
Now, is it just Bigfoot or monster sightings in general?
Just Bigfoot.
Just Bigfoot.
Which is a big enough scope.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And so what I try to offer with my books is something a little different. I mean, I don't want to do here's this state and here's all these things and here's this other state. People have done that. I mean, they've got state by state books. They've got books that are more aimed at just sort of here's this monster and here's the story. I'm trying to look at a whole geographical region and kind of see if there's any cohesive narratives and paths that connect these together so that the book is more of a, like my other books, where we're going to set out here and we're going to see where this leads us. So it's been a challenge, but it's cool, and I think ultimately when I can finish the book, it'll be awesome.
What do you have a time frame for when that might be done?
No, I never put deadlines on myself like that, and it's become more challenging to write books now because when I was writing Boggy Creek, I wasn't doing interviews, and I wasn't promoting another book, or I wasn't doing TV shows, and so now with 2 books behind me, I love to talk about this stuff, so I'm doing more radio shows and I'm involved in some TV stuff, which is fun and everything, but it's more challenging to find time to just sit back and write.
Right, that makes sense. What about one of the things skeptics will always throw up is there's never any fecal matter found, there's no bodies found, and so on and so forth. Any response to that?
Well, I mean, I have the same problems with that too. I mean, naturally, if these are real animals, we should find that kind of stuff. And everybody says, how many times do you see dead bears? Well, that's a good angle. However, there's a few. I mean, some people have found dead bears, so it's not an absolute answer. It's not a just because you don't find dead bears doesn't mean
there aren't any.
That we shouldn't find a Bigfoot.
Right. There's probably a lot more bear than Bigfoot, I would say, based on sighting numbers.
Sure. But, you figure as over the hundreds of years people have been tromping around in the North American woods and not one person, and of course they could have, and they just didn't know what it was or thought it's a bear. So it's, again, with all this cryptozoology, I always try to look at both sides and to try to say that just because there is no body doesn't mean there is no Bigfoot, because that's, the guy in the cubicle next to you at work or whatever, that's what their reasoning is. Well, there's no body, there's no Bigfoot. Well, dude, if you're like us and we talk on a daily basis to people who have either seen something strange or document all these sightings, I can tell you people have seen weird stuff. People have seen stuff. And I just kind of feel like that, since I don't feel like that everybody's making this up, there's got to be something to it. And so hopefully one day we can get our heads around why we're not finding.
Right, and it's also possible they take care of their dead. They seem to be intelligent, so.
Sure, yeah, certainly if they're looking after each other, that would make it extremely hard to find one.
And if they're digging holes to bury their scat in?
They could, but I mean, it just seems like a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but it would explain why we don't find any.
But yeah.
And at the same time, it might not be distinctly different looking than bear scat.
So you may pass it up and thinking it's bear. So yeah, there's any number of things we can always look at to prove or disprove depending on the way you look at it. But ultimately, just because there's no scat, just because there's no solid proof doesn't mean that they don't exist. There's still always that possibility, I suppose, until someday no one ever says they saw another Bigfoot or something, and then maybe we say, well, I guess they all died out.
Right.
But until that day comes, I'm on the case.
What about people who say they've communicated with these things, knocking on trees and stuff like that? Have you did any research on that?
That's another one that a lot of people have very definitive answers, and they know. I don't know. I mean, yes, there's knocking in the woods, and yes, there's incidents where there was a knock that did not sound like a tree falling. It did not sound like a squirrel throwing a nut out of a tree. This sounded like a knock in a place where there's no humans. So, whether they're using that as a communication to each other or whether it's a warning to you, not sure, but it's certainly possible that they could use that as a form of communication. So
I've seen some videos or heard some recordings actually of people making noises and then the Bigfoot mimicking them, or what they claim is a Bigfoot mimicking them in the distance. But of course, you're not seeing what's actually making the noise, but it doesn't sound like a person.
Yeah, I mean, sounds, sounds made by animals in the woods in which the person does not see the animal are even harder to know if that's good or bad evidence. Because I've had people tell me, oh man, I heard this scream and it sounded like a woman screaming. I'm like, and you sure it wasn't anything else, like a cougar? Well, no. I'm like, have you ever heard a fox scream? No.
Or a coyote?
A coyote's howl. Coyotes, fairly identifiable, but it's something like a fox. People go, foxes scream? Like they sure do. Take a listen. It sounds like, if you heard that in the woods in the dark, it sounds like a woman screaming.
Huh.
And most people don't understand the strange sounds and the number of sounds that other common animals make. So while there may be a Bigfoot screaming and all this, people are constantly mistaking common animals for Bigfoot. So it becomes a very muddy place to try to build any kind of evidence. I'm looking for a footprint, I'm looking for a sighting, I'm looking for a hair, I'm looking for a body, because those things are less subjective.
Have you found anything physical?
No, not that I would, I mean, I've found things that if I looked at it hard enough, I could say it was a footprint, but I think we've got enough of that out there already.
Yeah, well, that's
I'm really
true.
picky. I'm like, unless I see just a good,
nice, fresh, print, deep print.
That's why I don't post a lot of foot. You don't see a lot of stuff on my Facebook where, oh, look at this shadow, it's a Bigfoot. I mean, there's so much of that out there. I'm like, I'm only going to present something if it's pretty clear. And so, no, I've never found anything that's, unfortunately, that I would call good, great.
And you've never seen anything yourself?
No. I've heard some stuff. Definitely heard, but again, even me, I hear a howl that I know what the fox sounds like. I can rule that out. I know what the coyote, I've been hunting since I was 3. Even birds make very weird noises.
Right.
Even myself and my buddy who grew up as a trapper in Mississippi, neither one of us can figure out what we heard. And it had followed us through the woods basically and was howling at us. I don't know what that was. But again, I didn't see it, so
Right.
I can't sit here and go, oh, I heard a Bigfoot. I mean,
It's in the back of your head, but you can't prove that's what it is.
right, so I don't want to ever make that kind of definitive statement because that's not scientifically sound. But I can tell you it was weird, and I think it's possible.
I was in the woods with a friend of mine where we were shooting a movie we were making. It was just him and I in the middle of nowhere, and everything was dead quiet, and we start hearing this beeping noise. And there's nothing electronic around. We're like, what is that? And it sounds like it's coming from the sky, and we're looking up. It was a bird.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be echoing just right that it sounded like an electronic beep, beep, beep. But then as it moved further away, we heard more to it, and we were like, that was a bird.
Yeah, and that's the thing that sounds, especially out in different places, can really sound strange, and your mind automatically, it sounds like a beep.
Yeah.
You know, your mind needs to frame it into something known, and then suddenly you're like a bird. I once heard, I was camping in one place, and I heard what I thought was a dying bird. And I was on the edge of a lake, actually, and I hear this god-awful sound. I'm like, dude, this bird is... Now, first, it's waking me up. That's pissing me off. Second, it sounds like it's dying. I need to go out there and put this out of misery. So finally, I get up, and I get the flashlight and go, and I'm looking on the edge of the lake where I think this bird would be, and I'm not seeing anything. And eventually, I come up, and of course, once I got out of the tent, it's silent. It's not making any noise.
Of course, yeah.
So, damn it. Thinking if I go back to bed, I'll get snuggled in, and it'll start making the noise.
Right.
So I might as well find it now and cut its head off and put it out of its misery. But I can't find it. Eventually, I see this weird-looking cat over in the bushes. Put my light right on it. I'm thinking, is somebody's, like, it was just a domestic cat out here? It's just weird. And eventually, it kind of ran off, and I chased it away, and it ran off. I was thinking, well, maybe that was making the sound. And sure enough, when it got down in the woods over there in the dark again, it made that sound. That sounded like a dying bird. And this was a cat, and I saw the cat, and I know it made the sound. And I wasn't sure what it was at first, but later I determined it was a jaguar rundy, which was in East Texas. And all those things are rare, and they're not supposed to be anywhere out of South Texas. But this was way up in East Texas. I'm like, and that's why I didn't recognize the sound. But there again, I thought it was a bird.
Right.
I get out there. Not only is it a cat, but it's a cat that's not even supposed to be in East Texas. I'm like, weird.
Well, it wandered.
It was hungry. It was walking up to some new area.
What do you think the most misunderstood thing about cryptozoology is?
I guess that it's misunderstood, as something that's more childish, or people don't consider, especially these days, the scientific approach that a lot of these guys take. The sophistication of the gear and the qualifications of some of these guys that are out there in the field, even if they're not trained zoologists. I know guys that are background in Air Force and law enforcement and wildlife biology, and they're out there looking for Bigfoot. I think people in general just think, it's a bunch of kooks or whatever. But there are so many people from so many different walks of life that participate in what could be called cryptozoology. I don't think the average person understands the depth of seriousness and the research that goes on, and the type of people that conduct that research.
All right. What's the weirdest thing that's happened to you doing all this?
Well, the weirdest thing, I mean, if you want to count just the accounts that people tell me, I mean, because especially doing events and going around and meeting so many people puts me in touch with people who want to share a strange story. Like, oh man, let me tell you about this Bigfoot, or the strangest stuff is when they want to tell you about something that's really off the map. Let me tell you, I knew this guy who told me he saw a pig man. I'm like, a pig man? I mean, you're like, it had a man's face in a pig's body, or a pig's face in a man's body.
Yeah.
You know, like, what are we talking here? And they would tell me this just strange and spooky story about this dude. He was driving and he sees this thing run out of the woods, and it's got a pig's face, and it gets really, really strange. And in some cases, I mean, these people, and I try to follow up and interview these people, and sometimes I interview these people directly, and you can tell they saw something.
Right,
you can feel it. They're not just making it up, or let's tell this dude I saw a pig man. So you just constantly in touch with things that your average person doesn't hear. Like you. I mean, you hear so much strange stuff that you realize that the world isn't as simple and as sewn up as we think it is.
Yeah.
There is a lot of unknowns and a lot of strange things that occur that we just don't have an explanation for. And so being in this field and you just come into contact with more and more of that, which is the fun part.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on the chupacabra? Do you think that's a real creature? Do you think it's misidentification, something paranormal?
Well, I mean, there's two aspects to that. First, you have the original reports from the Latin America countries that talk about a different description, more of a bipedal animal that's a little more alien-like, whereas in later times the media is talked about the four-legged canid, dog-looking animal. So as far as that, the canine version, I think it could be a hybrid species between a Mexican wolf and a coyote or something weird.
Right.
But I don't think it's a paranormal being.
And a lot of times they might be misidentifications too.
Yeah.
If you had like the one that was a raccoon, basically a raccoon with no hair on it, and they had it in the cage, and we're like, we got the chupacabra.
Yeah, and it does look weird, and it fits the description. And 40 people post that on my Facebook. Have you seen this? I'm like, it's a raccoon or whatever. Yes, it's definitely weird looking. So that version of chupacabra, I think, is just a media-driven thing. And while there could turn out to be some interbreeding between a coyote and a wolf or something that is mangy, sure. The Latin American version is a little more what I think is a traditional cryptid. It is said to be responsible for strange things. It's been cited by numerous people, although there's just not a lot of solid
evidence behind
that. And you're translating stuff from a different language.
True.
It gets real difficult unless you go to Puerto Rico or somewhere and just really look into it and really research it, because you really have a better opinion. And so, this is just one I haven't been very familiar with. I've talked to some people about this, and experts and people even from Puerto Rico, but I don't have, the jury for me is still out on whether the Latin American chupacabra is a true cryptid, or if it's something that people are misperceiving.
Or something else entirely.
Yeah, and a wildcat that was killing
Well,
these
you
animals.
can go on the paranormal, although I don't believe it's an alien, but it could be something paranormal.
Yeah. Well, there's all the government conspiracy type theories that they were creating some kind of a creature and it got out. Who knows?
Anything's possible.
It's possible. So it's one of those, if you started looking into it long enough, you could try to at least attempt to eliminate some of the theories and focus in on one that might be more the best.
Anything else people should know?
No. Visit me at LyleBlackburn.com.
That's what I was going to say. What's your website?
LyleBlackburn.com.
And you have 2 books out currently?
Yes, The Beast of Boggy Creek, The True Story of the Foul Monster, and Lizard Man, The True Story of the Bishopville Monster. Both of those are from Anomalous Books, widely available, Amazon, BarnesandNobles.com. So yeah, check out my stuff. And if you've seen something strange, get in touch.
All right, thanks.